when things aren't working great, when we're not getting all that we need, for example, in this case, understanding all your data and doing a good job of information governance at scale, people do one of two things, and it is they'll either do a lot more of what they're currently doing, or they'll stop doing what they're currently doing. And very seldom do they sidestep and try something new.
There is a whole bunch of content in the enterprise that people shouldn't even know exists.
We're waiting for the industry to catch up to us.
You're talking about the empowerment of the individual over the empowerment of the establishment. Today, I'm joined by Douglas Schultz. He's a senior technology manager at Access Sciences Corporation. It's really fun to sit down and talk about how information governance is evolving. I look back to when the original standards, for example, ISO 15,000 series for records management, I look at that and I say, it still makes sense. All pieces of information require metadata, and all the pieces of information require a life cycle associated with it. But I think it didn't go far enough. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about how we're shifting away from this focus on what it means to be records management specifically, and how information governance is more of the thought process.
Yeah, I think it's been evolving for, several years. And I think it's coming from the standpoint that people aren't just looking at managing their information from reducing risk, managing their information so that they're getting value out of it. That to me is where the information governance term has come from. It's really looking at your information holistically and looking at it so that you are getting value from it. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't lessen the need to have compliance and reduce risk, but get some value out of all these terabytes and petabytes of information that you have.
The ability to recall information, find the information that you need to support an activity, will help you not have to recreate the information. For example, if you're going to a job site to do a repair, the ability to recall information for that particular job site, for example, the drawings, the as-built, and that type of information, as opposed to having to go and re-engineer and redo the drawings, is a great example of something that has automatic cost savings. Could you maybe explore with me some other front of business, the ways of making people more efficient, especially in oil and gas, that goes beyond the simple idea of just records management and protecting your data?
It's a great example when you go out into the field and being able to have the whole history of that piece of equipment, everything that's ever been done to it. A lot of that would be near impossible to recreate if you didn't know what parts and components and everything that went into every one of those repairs, especially some of those capital assets that might be used for 5 or 10 years. It would be virtually impossible to recreate that when you went back into the fields. Really having that whole history of everything that was done, who all touched it, I think is very important in a lot of industries.
Do you find that you would have more of a voice as far as information governance because you have the ability to influence the front of the business more now than perhaps during the heyday of oil?
I think it's still a lot of companies are struggling to look at information for what kind of value you can get out of it. And I think the struggle is because of the volumes. They're not looking at ways to automate and use tools to help you get that value. That was my experience, and some of my former employers was trying to get management and upper management to see that value, and it was too many times it was let's look at it from a risk and being compliant standpoint.
Is it because it's just too big and nobody's really done a good job before? I know, for example, like personally, I'll say, I know I'm supposed to go to the gym every day and I know I'm supposed to eat right. And there's all sorts of things that I could do, but I also work 46 to 50 hours a week. And I also have kids and I also have other things that are more on my plate right in front of me. So the idea of doing all these extra things that are obviously going to make me healthier, going to make me happier, and in the long run, going to make me more profitable and live longer, go to the side, because those are kind of the risk management pieces that I can get away with not doing. Does business kind of run the same way?
I think in some respects it does. I mean, I know times that I have tried to show how some of these tools can help people get more value and have better organization. It, it was just hard to get people to focus on that. They were kind of like, well, this way I've got it organized now is working. And they certainly struggle with the volumes that they're trying to manage and trying to look through and trying to find that piece of content that's going to help them. I don't know. I think some of it is just, it's hard to change behaviors. People like, I know where to go on the file server to find that, even though I might question whether it's the right version or the right truth, but I know where they all are. So maybe it's a habit thing. You're trying to get people to change habits. You need to approach it from that standpoint of, what's going to be the wow for them, where they're going to want to adopt it and want to use it. I think that's a struggle on a lot of technology projects, is trying to find what is going to tip them to start using this.
When things aren't working great, when we're not getting all that we need, for example, in this case, understanding all your data and doing a good job of information governance at scale, people do one of two things, and it is they'll either do a lot more of what they're currently doing, or they'll stop doing what they're currently doing. And very seldom do they sidestep and try something new. Do you think that's happening in our industry? Do you think people are really, well, let's double down on our information governance thing that we've been trying to do for the last 2 years, or let's stop doing it? And how often do you actually hear somebody say, let's push that aside, ignore the sunk cost, and try on something completely new, a new project, perhaps with a new way of informing the data? How many people are acting in that more futuristic way?
Unfortunately, I don't see very many that are doing it. I think it really gets difficult, and I think just kind of the price challenging times that energy companies are in right now. There's so much pressure on being more efficient, and while prices are starting to improve, I still don't hear a lot of companies wanting to do, hey, let's totally try something different. I don't know if it's a risk thing or what it is. I know in one of my employers, it was just trying to find the right audience to show what these technologies could do, and that's where I kind of struggled, was getting the right people in the room, because I think the tools can sell themselves, and getting more value out of the information is just getting it in front of the right people.
Yeah, that it certainly makes sense, because at some point it's beyond having a champion within the organization. There's lots of champions. I think, Doug, I'm sure you have peers in other organizations that see eye to eye with you on the choice for innovation. It's finding the visionary who holds the budget, who's willing to take a risk on something new, is in some ways, despite the fact they do less work, they're way more important to the process than the champion. Who are those visionaries within an organization, or should organizations really start investing in people who are willing to take on different approaches to the same old challenge?
Yeah, to me, I think some of those visionaries are some of the people that really understand the value of data in a company. And so it might be the people that see the value in structured data, because then if you can find those people, then you can certainly show them how you can use machine learning and artificial intelligence to pull that same information out of that unstructured information and give it to them like it looks like structured data. I think if you find somebody that really understands the value of data and then convince them that I can give you that same information out of this unstructured information, that might make a good champion.
Sure. Like certainly nobody likes to go first. Um, and I get that. I mean, there is examples of other organizations who are investing in alternate approaches to the big bucket, put it over here and manage it over here approach of today and yesteryear. Uh, they, are people starting to think beyond the applications itself and start thinking about their data first? Or are we just too early for that still?
I think there's still a lot of siloed application thinking in companies because that's, realistically, that's the way things get implemented. So, let's bring in this new application to do this, or let's bring in this new application to do that. I think trying to find people to look beyond the application and look at the data that the application is either generating or managing, finding those people, I think that's where the challenge is and where it's difficult.
Yeah. And it's true. And I think that's our issue with a lot of technologies, and it might be why and I'll phrase it as a question. Is that why our management always lags behind the innovation to create the data is on the spot, and we see how it hits the front of our business? Creating the data makes complete sense, but managing, understanding, recalling and all that is oh yeah, we forgot to make this a priority as much as creating the data. And then all of a sudden we're in this catch-up game, which we need to bring in AI and other things, because if it's humans trying to catch up, we'll never get there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think it still is from the standpoint that we still look at the data too much from, what do we need to do from a compliance standpoint with it? And what do we need to do from a legal risk standpoint? I mean, I think we're still looking at it through the wrong lenses and not enough at how can we get more value out of this? I think that's probably why we continue to lag.
People have to recognize that understanding your data very well, using it in more of a predictive capacity, using it in more of a efficiency capacity is going to help them maintain a competitive position in the future. I don't think anybody would dispute that. And I just wonder there's got to be people looking at that and saying at some point we really got to invest here if we're going to remain competitive into the whatever infinity of future that we're staring down.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you probably heard about our fiasco here in Texas with this freeze we had a few weeks ago. Where the energy, we almost all lost electricity because the energy companies had kept up with demand, and it wasn't a competitive standpoint. It was they just didn't want to invest, to maintain that infrastructure. Still a lot of investigation going on whether how much data they had to support that they needed to prepare for that kind of event. A lot of people called it a once in a generation event. So, I don't know. I don't know how you plan for those.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah. And it is like certainly, and I'd like to think even with COVID, whether we've overreacted, underreacted, or whatever, I think everybody hopefully agrees that 5 years ago, we didn't know what was going to happen right now, and we have to react to it regardless of whatever severity we perceive of it being. Perhaps events like that are in a similar vein, is that these things are possible. There's no question that these things are possible, but whether or not we should prepare for them and whether or not they're going to happen in our lifetime, and is it my responsibility to plan for that, or is it somebody else's? I agree. These are bigger questions than what we're going to resolve in a content management and information governance call.
Yeah, but you kind of bring up a good point there. You COVID-19, and I mean, and look at how well all these pharmaceutical companies have managed that information and that data to get it turned around so quickly so that they could make the right kind of vaccine. So with the right impetus, the companies will invest and do the things that they need to do to make the most use of their data.
Yeah, it is interesting, and like, and I'm going to try to focus as much as I can on the whole data side of this. I'm glad that there are industries like pharmaceutical, and I'll bring up engineering as well. And obviously in oil and gas, it's mostly about asset management and engineering, and monetizing those skills and assets. But I mean, when we build a bridge, there's no debating whether or not we want that bridge to be safe and perform and be serviceable for the lifetime of the bridge. Plus, and so there's no ambiguity there. We all agree, yep, we're going to invest in that. We're going to test it and make sure it's okay, because obvious results that are catastrophic if that thing falls over. It's a physical thing. And sometimes it gets harder when we're talking about more abstract things like oil flowing through pipes and going through distribution channels, or when we're talking about treating diseases and this type of, it becomes more abstract. So it's harder to really double down on this is where your data is and this is what we agree on facts.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I can see that comparison, and I'm not sure why we struggle not making the same sense of urgency, in other industries as well.
Yeah, it is, because I have heard like many organizations say, "Oh, well, we are in this industry, but really we're a data company," and sometimes it's a veneer, and sometimes it's really true, where they really triple down and say we're going to bring in as much automation as is reasonable, and we're going to look for ways of having people have jobs that are uh, less manual task and more knowledge based in that. And I feel like there's a lot of meat left on that bone in a lot of industries. And it seems like oil and gas is just kind of wading into that now. Of course, lots of automation on the front of the business, but on the back of the business, there's some lessons to be learned there yet.
No, I agree. I know we were just, this last company I worked at, we were just starting to get into more of that, analytics, where we analyzed equipment and looked for how much longer something was going to be before it failed, and then made sure that we had the right parts and the right people in the location to fix it when that mean time to failure came up. And that seems like, that kind of thing has been in a lot of industries for a long time. And not really sure why oil and gas, even the intelligent routing of your trucks to the fields or the wells that are most productive. I mean, I don't think we were starting some of that until maybe a couple of years ago, where UPS and other delivery companies have been doing that kind of stuff for a long time.
Yeah, it is neat when we have new technologies. Like, I know about 4 years ago, when our company really started getting into our artificial intelligence and working with our customers on content recognition and in other areas, there was people asking about AI. I don't hear people asking about AI. Nobody walks up to me and says, "I've got $50 here, sell me some AI." And now it's back to outcomes again. And so they're asking about, okay, how can I understand more of my content, where it is? And how can I eliminate the stuff that I don't need anymore? How can I align the stuff that I do need? And I think blockchain falls into that, where I need non-repudiation. I need to make sure that this contract was actually signed by these people. That makes sense for blockchain. This is my kind of monologue-y way to getting to the question of, are we seeing a return back to outcome-based planning, where we're talking about, okay, how do we make sure that this contract is indeed the de facto one for blockchain, or how do we make sure that we're truly getting this outcome for this data, as opposed to just asking about, how do I use this new technology? Are we getting there back to outcomes again?
I think we are. People are. It's not just like, hey, I want to use the latest AI technology or machine learning. It's what's it going to do for me? What's in it for me? What can I expect if I make this investment? So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's less about, I want to use the latest technologies, more like, what can it do for me? I was talking to our president, where it's like, we need to find more ways to use artificial intelligence. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do with it? I mean, how do you want to use it? You don't just say, I want to do this technology. It's like you said a while ago. It's like, what am I going to do with it? What's going to be the outcome? That's what a customer wants to hear. They don't want to just say like, hey, I'm using artificial technology,
Check.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like, what am I doing with it? And I still think that's where you said, is it coming more back to outcomes? I think it's starting to shift that way, but I think it's still got a ways to go.
I agree. So, but I think we're going to be forced to get there, and I didn't want to wade in too deep on COVID or whatever, because these things are kind of political hot potatoes, but it's at the same time it does force our hand to, we got to start thinking about how we work together. How do we work with our information? In some ways we're more connected than ever, other ways we're more disconnected than ever. So we got to start making these decisions now.
Well, the COVID thing, when you brought it up, it really made me think those people have turned around information quickly. And I know a lot of it is kind of structured, but there's still a lot of, did this person have a fever? Did this person do this? I mean, there's still a lot of unstructured content that goes into all that stuff,
Yeah.
those trials.
Sure. Well, I remember watching a talk by Melinda Gates, and she was talking about, I think it was malaria vaccines or something like that, trying to get it distributed in different areas in Africa. And as they hired people to go out and do censuses and find out different information from people. And it would take like 8 weeks to 3 months to actually collect the information and bring it back and analyze it. And by then it was already out of date. But they realized Coca-Cola, who has a distribution model to every little town, city, and burg across everywhere in Africa, can tell you within 15 minutes when a bottle of Coke was sold. So she actually went to Coca-Cola and said, how do you guys do this? How do you actually do? And they implemented the same model as what Coca-Cola had, is that how they do the information gathering, what systems that they use. And then all of a sudden now they had near real-time healthcare data. So it was just kind of neat. That was innovative thinking, and saying somebody else is doing it for selling sugar water. Why can't we do it for actually saving lives? Well, this has been a great conversation today, Doug. I appreciate it, and I hope to do it again with you soon, because I think I think we're on the leading edge of something in this industry. And when we look back in 4 or 5 years, these will be more solved problems than they are right now, and we'll get to the front of the business. So I'll give you the last word, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, Jason, I really enjoyed chatting with you today too. I think these are some interesting topics, and I look forward to having more conversations with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.